Hello, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here with Helen Clark, who's here to be on a panel in a minute on female leadership here at IE. She's a former Prime Minister of New Zealand and also a former administrator at UNDP. So we're very fortunate to have you here. Thank you. And I know you just landed from New Zealand this morning, so thank you for finding the time to do this. And my questions are basically around the topic of female leadership. And the first one is, when you look at the data on inequality and discrimination of women in various spheres, you see that only 5% of CEOs in Fortune 500 companies are women. You see that the pay gap in the US is still about 20%. Of salaries against women. You see that across parliamentary democracies, only about a quarter of seats in parliament are occupied by women. So, we can see that there are still these issues out there. Why would you say this is the case? What do you think are the main causes? And I know it's a very broad question. And if you had to point to a few key solutions, changes that you would like to see, what would those be?
The gender gap is still very large globally. 23% of women parliamentarians, under 6% of prime ministers are female, under 8% of heads of state. Global gender pay gap of still around 63%. And we could go on. There is just such a huge gap. And it tends to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the law changes and policy changes that you need to change the settings that will make it possible for women to be more independent, legally, economically, socially empowered, don't necessarily come so quickly when parliaments and decision-making are dominated by men. So it really does need another round of huge activism by women to overcome these barriers. And we've seen different waves of feminism, the fight for the vote, for example. In the West, the women's liberation movement of the late 60s and the 70s. Now we have Me Too, which is focusing very much on the exploitation of women with sexual and gender-based violence, including in the workplace. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that there is still basic inequality in the economies, the societies, and decision making.
And if you had to point to, so you mentioned Me Too, and I'm very curious to know more about your assessment of the Me Too movement. Do you think it's fulfilled its mission or not? But beyond Me Too, are there any particular measures or actions that you think could be taken now that would alleviate part of this problem around the world?
Definitely. I mean, speaking for Western societies, what matters a great deal for women is access to early childhood care and education, so that the choice to be a parent and continue working and have a profession is a real choice. In my country, when I was Prime Minister, we legislated for 20 hours free early childhood care and education for 3 and 4-year-olds. Scandinavian countries do enormously better than that. On previous visit to Spain, I've gathered that still women here often rely on a grandparent to do caring, that there could be a lot more provision for those services for small children. Obviously, time out of the workforce when people are having their children is extremely important. Annual holidays are important so that parents can cover the time that children are out of school on holiday themselves. So there are a lot of practical measures that can be taken on recruitment, on promotion, on mentoring and support of female staff in a profession, in a workplace. That all helps as well. And then as women, we too have to step up. We often say we're not ready. Men don't usually say they're not ready, they go for it. But often women are more self-critical, less likely to put themselves forward even when they're supremely well qualified.
On that topic of putting yourself forward, I know you had a very long and distinguished career in the UN, and there was a very deep and significant debate at the UN about having a female Secretary General. You yourself were one of the people that was considered for the role. In the end, we did not get a female Secretary General. Why do you think that happened, and when do you think we will see a female Secretary General of the UN?
Well, I hope it will be next time when the 10th is chosen, because for 10 in a row to be male is really not acceptable at all. The ninth should have been female, and it's not just about me. There were other very competent women candidates, as well qualified or better qualified than any of the male candidates. So what was going on there? I think there's three elements in the selection. One is geopolitics, and frankly, if you're from the wrong region of the world, well, you can't do anything about that. But secondly, there's the issue of the style of Secretary General. Generally, the great powers have not knowingly selected a Secretary General who will speak truth to power. And if you then combine that with a gender perspective, actually, strong women are quite terrifying to many because they are seen as less controllable. So I think the gender factor played into it there, that there was strength of character among the women running. There has to be in the world that we came up in. If we hadn't had strength of character, we wouldn't be where we were. There, yeah. But that is not really what they were looking for.
Now, I was just reading an article in The Atlantic about the new authoritarians and the attack on women. So we're seeing, on the contrary to what you're proposing, we're actually seeing a backlash, a populist backlash to women's rights, minority rights. This is true particularly in the liberal world, in the Western world, that has to some extent built this architecture and some of these important movements for women's rights. So do you see that trend? I mean, do you think this is a reality, that there is a streak within the populist backlash that is fundamentally anti-women? And if you do, how concerned are you about this, and how do you think we should tackle this?
I am very concerned about it, and I think that we can never take the victories that women have won for granted. Take, for example, the United States of America, where it's possible that if there is another retirement of one of the more progressive judges on the Supreme Court, that you could have a court prepared to roll back the critical Roe versus Wade decision, which gave women a constitutional right to abortion. This would be a disaster. We have seen in Brazil the election of a populist far-right president who has women on his sides, along with quite a lot of others. I was astonished, frankly, that even in liberal Norway, when some pressure came on the government recently, that it was even suggested by a woman Prime Minister that the issue of abortion could be put back on the table to in some way appease a far-right party from whom support was needed. I understand that with the rise of the far-right in the Andalusian elections here, this is also an issue. So for women, all the warning alerts must go out that we can't take any of the gains for granted. We have to keep mobilised, keep fighting for them, keep campaigning for them.
You bet. Well, Helen, I don't want to take more of your time. We have to head out to this session. Thank you, everybody, for following this, and thank you for being here and for bringing this very important debate to our classroom and to our students and to our faculty. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you.